So these things are trying to give you the tools. You don't want to sell something below variable cost unless, I mean, honestly, the guy yesterday with the cucumbers said he has to do that in given weeks. And I understood where he was coming from. So you've got to make decisions based on your farm needs. And we make that decision at Grasshoppers. You know, if I cannot keep open during the entire winter at Grasshoppers, I have to lay off the entire staff, and I won't be able to get the thing back going in the spring. So our focus in the winter, the way I think about the business in the winter is differently from in the summer. Now, I got to make sure that annually we're doing okay. But over the winter, it's a little bit of a different look, and that's how it is for this cucumber fellow. You know, part of it, his thing, too, was I got to keep my crew. I got to keep paying my crew. So there's variety of costs coming in. Did you have a question?
Yeah, my question was if this is your consideration for delivery, you haven't really factored in the cost of the driver.
Yeah, no, it's in there. This is just the worksheet for the actual vehicle rate. If you go now to the market analysis sheet, I think it's called, that's where the labor cost comes in. Let's see here. Market trip analysis, do you see that one?
Okay.
This is the trip decision that sort of Carl and I went through theoretically. This one's on carrots. We had the conversation about turnips. But in this one, you can see we've got the total round trip mileage. We've got the person, whoever's going, their time at the warehouse, dropping off. We've got the harvest cost, because that's a variable cost. I mean, you could always leave those turnips in the field, right? That's a decision that you need to make, so you want to incorporate. Now, this is where yesterday the cucumber guy said he would put 0 in there because he's not going to consider that cost, because he's got to sell those. He's got to get them out of the field anyway. But this is the way you would ideally want to do it, is put that 28 cents in there. And then the time of the driver is calculated based on the mileage and assuming 45 miles per hour. So you can change those numbers and adapt those for what you feel like is realistic for you. Does that make sense? You see where we incorporated that. The first thing you need to do is get a rate sheet. You know, that the initial question was, on the crop journal, how does 1.5 hours on the tractor translate into dollars? And the first, the vehicle analysis is how it translates into a dollar rate. Does that make a little bit of sense? I know it's a lot. More than happy to answer individual questions. Carl and I had talked about setting ourselves up in another room, and if people wanted to come and ask us individual questions later on during the day, we'd be happy to go into more depth, because we just don't have that much time.
And then during the summer, you can come back and actually you're mining data all summer long. How long it takes to what your costs are to produce any given crop. You can go back in and actually do the detail work during the winter.
But yeah, tell them. I mean, you could start with somebody else's template to start.
Right, and there's several in this book. It's a really cool book. It works for me. I was shocked at some of the differences. I mean, I had a gut feeling that for myself, I wasn't able to make much money at corn, if at all. And other crops looked really good to me, but I didn't really know why. I looked at the crop enterprise budget for corn, and here, Richard, it's a loss for him. I mean, there's ways you can make money at it, but I wasn't doing it. And then for say parsley, it was crazy. It's like $47,000 an acre or something. Wow. I don't have a market for a whole acre of parsley, but I can take a portion of that, and I did that last summer, and we actually made really good money on parsley. So it's really worthwhile to take the time to at the very least look at somebody else's crop enterprise budgets, and hopefully put together your own.
So, well, the crop enterprise budget is the hardest part. Although if you have the crop journal and you've kept your expense records, it really is just a math problem. It's a little complicated the first time you do it. So if you're uncomfortable with it, there are online resources. I'm more than happy to help anybody put their initial together. There are some good books together. out there that'll help you. But basically, you want to start with your revenues, and this should come directly from your market plan. So if you've done your market plan, you should have already, okay, here's what I'm hoping to get. And you think of, and then that converts into how many beds do you need to produce that volume. And you've got to remember that you're talking about a volume of firsts up here, at least. You can incorporate seconds into one of these things if you want to, but I think that's a little risky myself. So this is just an example of what kind of yield you're getting. And then all of this stuff down here really comes from that crop journal that you've been keeping. And then in this one, we use $12.55 as the hourly rate. So you can calculate what makes sense to you on the hourly rate. And you might, anyway, I won't overcomplicate it. So you can just sort of see it's nice to categorize these things by, what you're doing, the pre-harvest, the harvesting, post-harvest handling. And then there's a delivery calculation in there, which comes from the delivery vehicle rate and the number of trips you're going to have to make to each of those markets to sell the volume that you have in your market plan. Is that making my losing everybody now? Well, we can go over this, like I said, in a little bit more detail. So, but what it does is this is the bottom line here. Where are we? So the total cost in this case per pound is $1.20. And
for an entire season on carrots?
Well, this is just an example. So we were doing it off of 2 beds.
That's a suggestion. Oh.
You don't really need to. You only need to do this, and this does help. You only really need to do it off of something that's extrapolatable. That cannot be a word. But if you're handling one bed the same way you're handling every other bed, then just track one bed and multiply it times the number of beds you have. It's fine. Use tricks you don't have to go overboard and go too crazy. If every time you're handling carrots, you're handling them pretty much the same, the cost drivers are the same. Now, things vary over the course of the season, and there might be some issues there in terms of increased labor for weed management and yield changes. So you got to think about, all right. But,
So this is kind of an end of season analysis, though.
Yes, absolutely. You don't have time to do this during the season. Nobody has time to do this during the season. That's what the crop journal is for.
So during the winter, like right now, you could rough one of these things out, but there's going to be a lot of guesswork involved, and you wouldn't really be able to get specific as to such good detail as Mr. Wiswall has in his until you actually get the data that you gather during this growing season.
But how do you plan?
Wait, yeah, microphone, please.
Like, how would a beginning farmer plan out their season then, to have to wait until they make a loss before they realize it's a loss?
That's a good question. I guess I think a lot of that you'd have to do a lot of communicating with other farmers. If you're truly just beginning, and you've interned with me, so you know it all, right?
I got it down.
Yeah.
Well, but that is a good point. There are resources out there. And one resource is your farmer. If you interned with Carl, then you ought to go to Carl and say, hey, help me be successful. and have him show you some of his methods and some of his experience. And in the course of sitting down with him for a day, he'll tell you mistakes he made and mistakes you're likely to make and where you're going to get yourself into trouble.
Yeah, it occurred to me, too, that, not only are there already crop enterprises